talk about today is anger in the sort of the big picture, and looking at styles of anger, because I think when we work with folks that we're working with and here at Sovereign and other agencies, that we deal with anger, and we tend to judge people's dangerousness or who they are around how they do anger. So I want to ask you, I want to talk about styles of anger. How many of you would consider yourselves more volatile when you get angry? And when I say that, I mean maybe your eyeballs pop out of your head a little bit, maybe the veins stand out in your neck, maybe you move your arms around a little bit, maybe your voice gets louder, maybe you drool a little bit. How many of you would consider yourselves more volatile when you get angry? Okay, and the rest of you are passive aggressive, is that right?
Assertive. Thank you.
So let me ask you, for those of you who are more volatile, how do you feel when you're trying to communicate with somebody you love and somebody you care about, and they fold their arms and they kind of look at you and they don't say anything? How do you feel when that happens?
More infuriated.
More infuriated. So take it a step further. What does it mean to you when they do this?
Rejection.
Rejection?
Shame.
What? Pain? What else?
Shame.
Shame? Do they care?
Nope.
Okay, so our assumption is that this means I don't care, right? Because we're looking at us. We're judging on us. Now, for people who are more passive or quieter with their anger, how do you feel when somebody who's more volatile is coming at you, their voice is louder, their eyeballs are popped out, they look and sound angry? How do you feel when that happens?
Afraid.
Afraid and intimidated. Because if you look like that, you'd be homicidal, right? So one of the things that tends to be true is we tend to look at people who do anger differently than we, and we judge them on our yardstick. And so, and I'll give you an example, just in my men's group, in my domestic violence anger management group, one night we had a man come in who was a light bird colonel from Special Forces. And when he came in, the men in group asked him, "Why are you here?" And they said it was terrorist threats. Now, they used to call them terrorist threats until 9/11, now they're called criminal threats. And I said, "Well, what did you threaten?" He said, "Well, I told my wife that if I didn't get to see my son, I was going to put her in the trunk of my car and take her on a one-way trip." And then I called her sister, and I told her sister the same thing. Now, it wasn't an exactly bright light bird colonel thing to do, because he left the message on the answer machine, and they took it to the police, and he got arrested. Because that's one of the only verbal things you can be arrested for, right? It's one of the only things in the criminal code that you can be arrested for, in terms of verbal stuff. And I looked at him and I said, you're in Special Forces, you've been trained to kill, you've been in combat. I would believe you if you said that to me, and I would be intimidated by it. And he sort of blew me off like, like a woman. That's, you'd be scared. Okay. But after group that night, two of the biggest, most volatile men in group came up and said, Alice, that guy's scary. You know what the quiet ones are like. So, if he's the kind of guy, he could come back to group next week with a gun. He could shoot all of us. And I said, well, I don't think he's going to do that. And then later I thought, well, what if I'm wrong? And I thought, well, there'll be no witnesses. So I can go out being right, as we talked about, being right. So anyway, but I said to them, would you be willing to tell him that he scares you? And they said, well, we're scared. And I said, well, think about it. If you could do that, I think it would make a huge difference to him and to you. And so that's what they did the next week. They said to him, when we were listening to you, you were really cold. There was like no feeling. Your eyes were cold. Your jaw was tight. They described to him exactly why he frightened them. And he learned and took it much more seriously because people who were bigger than he was and looked tougher were afraid of him because of the way he came across. So anger can be a very intimidating thing for people in either way. And most people who get together in a relationship have different styles, right? Most of you in relationship with somebody who does anger differently than you do, right? So one of the big issues is we tend to take the style personally. We tend to think they're jerking us around, right? They're doing that just because they know it's going to upset us. When in fact, that's usually not true at all. What's usually true is that's the way they do it. So I want to talk to you about some anger management techniques, because I like to give people something that they can use with their groups or the people that they work with. So we use a technique called timeout, and the original work on timeout, I think, was done by, Aaron Beck did, cognitive behavioral. But then in terms of domestic violence, we got it from Dan Sonkin and Michael Durfee. And they put together a paradigm. Are there any handouts on, are there any handouts as questions? Mm-hmm. Okay, well,
What were the two theorists' name again?
Sonkin and Durfee. It's a book, I think it's a very useful book, by the way, for anybody who works in substance abuse as well. It's called Learning to Live Without Violence. I'll tell you, when I went through the training that was done, it was back at the Rader Institute. We did a 48-hour substance abuse training and went through the programs with everybody. I sat and listened to people talk about their abusive behavior, and nobody addressed it. Because I don't think you can be a substance abuser and not at the very least emotionally abuse the people who you live with, because they live in sort of a chronic apprehension. So I think this book, Learning to Live Without Violence, it deals with things like, there's a section on jealousy, which is terrific, things on what you learn in your family of origin. So it's a really good book. It's Volcano Press. So you probably either have to call Volcano Press directly or go on Amazon. Volcano Press was owned by a mother and son who were terrific, so I always like to support the independence. So if you call Volcano, they did that. Anyway, timeout is basically, and if you look up, I have a website, it's just aliceleviolet.com, so I don't forget what it is. I make it easy, I just attach it to my name. But there's, under the section of publication, there's things like benefits of group, tips for victims of domestic violence, what children learn in abusive families, but there's a timeout. And timeout is basically a cognitive behavioral paradigm that starts with an event. An event happens. And whatever that event is, we immediately experience either, well, first of all, we have a perception of it, right? And that's our judgment. That's how we believe what we think about it. So that's there. Then the next thing that happens is, or they happen at about the same time, is physiological arousal. So we have a body response. And then we react, right? So one of the things I see, for instance, and I've worked on several court cases now with young people, where all their Twitter accounts and their Gmails are all public record now, all their private stuff, because they fought over social media. And one of the things you see with social media is people expect a response like right away. So people aren't thinking about how they respond, they continue to react. And it's just back and forth, and you see the escalation in the texts and in the tweets and all that kind of thing. So the idea here is that we have a way to come between what we feel and how we respond. So let me ask you, how many of you have ever felt like telling a boss or a client to shut it? You don't feel like that?
Today.
How many of you routinely do that? How many of you routinely tell bosses and clients to shut it? Why not?
Because I keep losing my job.
You could lose your job. Okay, so logical consequences.
Lose a license.
What's that?
You could lose a license.
You could lose your license, another logical consequence. And they're usually witnesses. We're all better with witnesses, aren't we? Or you hope, the people that aren't better with witnesses, you gotta be a little more cautious about. But we all know how to step back, because we do it, like weekly usually. Some depending on where you work, you could be doing it daily. But you're doing it all the time. When we get home, we stop paying attention. And that's part of the difference, that we're paying attention at work, and we get home and somewhere that sort of goes to the wayside. So what we want to do, perception is important, because perception governs our behavior, right? Our judgment of things, how we see them, how we interpret them. But it can take you a few days, it can take you a lifetime to figure out how you saw something, right? So the idea is that you want to interact at arousal. Arousal is the easiest place to plug people in. So let me ask you, how many of you know where you feel it when you get really, like, mad? Get it right before you blow a head gas. Where do you feel it? Okay, you get hot, and is it localized, or does it?
Yeah, I usually look in my chest.
Okay, so you get hot, very hot in your chest. Who else knows where?
Yeah, I get it right in my gut. Right by my, right there.
And what happens?
I feel sick.
Okay,
I feel like really sick,
okay,
fast.
okay, so, okay. Anybody else know where they feel it? Yeah.
My heart beats really fast.
Your heart beats really fast. Okay. Anybody else?
My ears get wet.
You feel it in your lungs.
In your lungs?
You start feeling like your heart.
Oh, okay, so you get a real tightness in there. Who said they feel it in their ears? Does it go up to your face?
No, I just feel my ears feel hot, like there's steam coming out. Like
I'm gonna piss you off because I want to see that. My ears actually get hot too, but are you Irish? See, I think it's a genetic defect of the Irish. I'm trying to find about 10 Irish people who get red in the face, get hot in the ears, and I think I can get federal funding to study. They'll pay you for any dumb things there is to study, right? I'm sorry, but they will. So that's the most efficient place to key in, is in your body. Besides that, it gets people somatically aware, right? If you know your cues, and this works with, I was talking to a group of high school kids, and one of the young women said, I get a tick in my eye when I get upset, but it's not like a minor one, it's like, I said, well, at least you can't hurt anybody, you can't even see where you're going. But, so we started arousal. What we ask people to do is to, when they begin to feel this, whatever that is, this tightness in their chest, this steam in their ears, this hot flash in their chest, this feeling sick to their stomach, that they leave the situation. Now, this is generally at home. Now, if you're with somebody who does not play chase with you, you can do this. Do you know what I'm talking about? Have y'all played chase? You know, when the other person tries to leave and you follow them and you stick your head in the, oh yeah, no. And then they escalate, and then you're all over the place until you get in your last best shot. But the idea is we don't want to play chase. So it's about, you know, if you can stay in the same house or apartment and you can just shut a door and the person honors that, then that's cool. If not, leave the situation, walk outside. And to do several things when you walk out. How many of you have seen people use those love bats? They beat the crap out of things, you know, with the little love bats, the batakas and whatever. We usually feel that most people understand aggression fairly well. And that what is better is to do a non-aggressive physical movement. So you do something like Olympic walk, you can do isometrics, you can inline skate, you can ride a bike, you can dance, you can, anything that's non-aggressive. You can shoot little Nerf balls into the basket, you can lift weights, anything that begins to bring the level down, right? to bring your physiological energy level down. Because when we get angry, we're triggered into fight versus flight, which is a very primitive mechanism in the brain. And if we act at that place where we're getting the externalization, the blood flow is all over the place, we're releasing stress hormones, we're going to overreact. There's not a way not to overreact, one way or the other. So the idea is to do something to bring that level down. The second part is up here. How many of you have ever, left a situation where you were really upset, really angry, walked out of it, and come back and been as angry as you were when you left? What did you do when you left?
What did I do when I left?
Yeah.
It's a meditation, it's a breathing. I didn't have time to go bicycle riding.
But you did some, but you were as angry when you came back.
Yeah.
So you're probably doing something else too.
Thinking about it the whole time you're gone.
Thinking about it. See, most of us become history majors when we're pissed off with our partners. We remember everything they did in the whole history of our relationship with them, right? And then we're ready, we come back and we're ready to give it to them because we are righteous now. We got like God on our side of everything. So we are entitled to give them whatever we think is the truth at that moment. So we work with people on talking themselves down. Most of us have lots of experience talking ourselves into a worse place. Beth, I have to thank her at lunch. I wanted a brownie really bad. And I said, I'm going to deprive myself of the brownie. And she said, you don't want to say deprive yourself, you're going to feel bad. And I said, okay, I'm choosing not to have a brownie. I don't feel bad anymore. I'm just going to drive somewhere after I see you guys and buy a brownie. Not really, but I mean, I feel better, right? What we say to ourselves makes a difference. I mean, how many of you have ever experienced depression? Right, the common cold of mental illness, right? We've all had depression. So think about it. You're walking across the street and you're not depressed. You're in a good place. You see somebody you know, and they walk by you and they don't say hi. What do you say to yourself?
A little profanity, but not out loud.
Yeah, a little profanity.
Whatever.
What else do you say?
Why don't they like it?
Why don't they? If you're in a good place, do you say that?
Oh, I'm in a good place.
Yeah.
They just didn't see me.
They didn't see you. It becomes about them, right? They didn't see me. They're preoccupied. But if you're in a depressed place, why didn't they like me? Why I thought I had. I thought this person was my friend. Well, I guess I don't have any friends and I'll die alone. So the idea is, how do we talk ourselves into a better place? Now, if you're working with somebody who's been arrested on a DUI, or their family's left them, or they've been arrested for domestic violence and a DUI, or they've gotten separated, they're in a bad place. And they can say things like, I don't want to lose my family, right? I don't want to get arrested again. I don't want to lose my license. But what we want to get people to is what they want, right? That I want to feel good about myself. I want to feel proud of the way I handle this. I want my children and my partner to respect me. I want to respect myself, whatever that takes. And it takes practice. And I tell people this. I mean, when people come in on domestic violence, or the anger management is the big term now, you're all aware of that. But we know that 52 weeks of anger management is code for domestic violence. It actually is. It's easier for people to say, I'm going to anger management because everybody has anger stuff, than it is to say, I'm going for domestic violence. And I think about that. I used to speak for family groups in a lot of recovery centers. And I started by going in and talking about domestic violence. But it was too much for people. They're already in treatment. They're dealing with all that stuff. So I started going in and talking about anger, and they talked to me about domestic violence. It was amazing because they felt so much freer to talk about something that lots of people have issues with. Because think about it, none of us, if your parents did a good job, they probably didn't have a bunch of fights in front of you. And if they did a bad job, they probably had a lot of fights in front of you, so you still don't learn how to do it. We learn, that's a skill we learn by the seat of our pants about how to treat people. And I remember when you know, think about it. How many of you are in your early 20s? Okay, how many of you remember when you were in your early 20s? Remember how you could fight all night? You could have an argument that went on all night. You may not ever solve the problem, but you could do it all night. And I remember being able to do that, and we had a rule, whoever got to the car first got to leave. Yeah, and I lost every single time because he could run faster than I could, except for once I got out first. But we separated because what we felt like saying to each other was just not nice, right? It was just something, when you think about what you can say to somebody that will erode that friendship, that's so important to you. And the problem is that in relationship, there are no logical consequences right away. The only consequence is my partner gets angry or upset with me. But guess what? They get over and we make up, and maybe we have great makeup sex, and we get along really well for a while, and everything's cool, and so we feel differently about it at that point. And now that I'm older, I like to go to sleep on my anger because I wake up the next morning and I have no recollection of why I was angry anyway. And you're just too tired. You know, and you don't want to waste your time fighting. You want to handle it better, and it becomes more emergent as you get older to do that. I think when you're younger, you see yourself as having all this time to get things right, which is true until you're older. And then if you don't get it right, and I personally would like an A in relationship. I do not want a B. I don't even want a B+. I want a freaking A. Okay, so it's worth it to practice on anger. Now, people who have issues with rage and anger will say to you, can anybody take my anger away? They may be afraid of their own rage and anger. And I said, nobody's going to take that away from you because it's a human emotion. But what we can do is work on the destructive part of it. One of my early clients had been in recovery, I think, maybe 20 years. He was a real good street counselor. He counseled, and he said, I have done everything but rage and anger. I have worked on every addiction but my rage and anger. And he said, I'm afraid if I stop being angry, I will lose my passion. Because a lot of people tie that rage or anger and that passion together. And I said, you don't have to give up your passion at all. You just want to give up the part that intimidates the people around you. So we ask people to physically calm down and then to talk themselves down. And then you can go back and look at your perception. Because it's hard to solve a problem when you're in an escalated state. You really, you know, unless it's actually life or death and you have to make a decision like this, most of our decisions are not like that now. So we have time to back off, to look at the problem and find out what it actually is, and then to go back and talk about it. Now, people like to hear about the going back part, because what I hear people say is, first of all, they're afraid of being abandoned, that the person's going to leave and not come back. But if I talk to them about it together, they get what it's supposed to look like. And the other thing is that they are not supposed to sweep it under the carpet. They're supposed to talk about it. Think about arguments. Think about any time you've had an argument. Usually we do it in front of each other. And we go through the process of the argument and we figure out what we're upset about over here, our little kernel of truth. Meanwhile, the person we're arguing with has stopped listening back here because we've said or done something that has really either hurt them or angered them, whatever that is. So they've stopped listening. The idea with time out is to take the process of the argument away from the other person and come back with your little kernel of truth. Does that make sense? I just think it's practical. It just makes sense. And believe me, I see people do it who have had histories even of homicide. And they are practicing because something has become important enough for them to change their lives, as you see with substance abuse all the time.
Yeah, what do you do with the people who, when you walk away, they want you to think that you're gonna come back later, that you're taking time out, but they really just want to avoid the situation?
Well, actually, that's a lot of people. If they're in my group, the understanding is that they have to go back. They're supposed to go back. Now, I'm not there, but we talk about stuff in group. And somebody will talk about it, or they'll bring up, you know, I had this problem, I didn't know what to do, so I just walked out and I didn't. But we tell them that they should come back, by the way, in an hour or not a whole lot more, because if they take a whole lot more, it means they're ruminating. And we don't want them to ruminate. So, yeah, go ahead.
So do you teach them to have that timeout conversation with their partner when they're calm and they have a plan
Yes.
before they get escalated?
Yeah, in fact, what we will say to people is you don't learn to sail in a hurricane. You go out when the water's calm. And so you want to talk about this when you're in a good place. But what I do on intakes when I'm doing couples counseling, I use this right away, because you can't do couples counseling without working with anger, right? So I did this about the first session. I had a young couple in last night, and he breaks things. He broke their door, and he left and went to a hotel for the weekend, this weekend, and really upset because she wanted to talk about it. But she also calls him names. So when you're dealing with intimidating anger, you have to take the intimidation away and make it safer for people to be able to talk, to even feel like they can take the risk of having that talk. But what I do on the intake is I explain to both of them what it's supposed to look like. And that, so there's an accountability built in. Whether or not they become accountable is on them, but there's an accountability built into it. So, and did I answer either of your questions? Did I answer your question?
I don't know.
Well, if I've confused you and you don't know, then I feel my job is done.
Yeah.
What it is that you want to do on the timeout before they leave the room.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, you're doing it when the water's calm. You're doing it when, and you're doing it, a lot of times, people will come in, and you know this for treatment at all, it's when they feel guilty shortly after some big thing happens. You can get more mileage, because as Irma Bombach said, guilt is the gift that keeps on giving, right? So you get a little mileage about somebody coming in. But I tell people also, if they're separated, if you want somebody to stay in counseling, you probably ought to stay separated until they get entrenched in their program, because they will stop. They will stop coming and stop working on it because you're back. And what have they learned? They've learned that you'll come back. So it's kind of, you know, the anger thing is a big deal, and with most couples we wind up working on it. So we're getting them to, once again, identify the problem, figure out a solution to the problem, because the two things we know that de-escalate rage and anger are empathy and empowerment. Empowerment is problem solving, right? So the ability to solve a problem is a form of empowerment, so that we get people to come back and try to solve that problem. Now, what happens for most of the people in the groups I do is that they don't learn a complete timeout right away. They learn to leave before they do something, you know, destructive. But I think it's like the 12-step program in recovery. You don't do a really good fourth step when you start, right? It changes. You don't make your amends, and good amends. A lot of times you make an amends when the other person has no desire to hear your amends, and you're still coming from that self-absorbed place. So I also say to people, real change takes a long time, and I equate it to learning a second language emotionally. That when we learn a second language, it takes, I mean, first of all, you have to learn to pronounce words, right? You have to learn to understand what individual words mean. You have to learn how to put them in a sentence. You have to learn how to read the language. You have to learn how to do the grammar. You have to learn the idioms. It takes a long time to learn a second language really well. The man who's been in my group the longest has a history of organized crime and homicide, and he's just celebrated. We just had a big cake for him for his 17th year in our program. Our group in West LA, over half the group has been together for 4 years, over 4 years. And so they're doing really nuanced kinds of things. They're looking at power. We mix gay and straight in our groups. In the heterosexual gender stuff, we're looking at the differences in the way men and women might experience things. So we're looking at racism. We're looking at, we had a young man in our group who was Muslim from Egypt after 9/11. He said, everybody treated me differently. So I asked him during Ramadan if he would come in, they have to break fast at the end of the day, to come in and bring the food that would break the fast and explain to everybody what Ramadan was, and to share food and explain the meaning of the food to people. Because I think when we understand each other, it's harder to have those judgments that we can easily have if we don't know people. So, we do a lot. I think anger is a piece of everything, but you have to work around everything else to do anger right. You have to do prevention. Part of what we look at in terms of prevention, I use an Aikido. Does anybody have any questions before I sort of zip off one? I asked her if she would be my plant in the audience. Thank you so much. I'm gonna act completely surprised. Oh.
That's good, that works.
Yeah.
What about, how do you feel, or what are your thoughts on people who have the depression but just go to prescriptions? They don't deal with the issue.
Well, probably the view that most everybody in the room has, which is, I think we over-medicate in this country. But you see that with almost every aspect. You see that, I was thinking with education. In California, we change curriculum and things so quickly that we don't see if anything can work. And there's a lot of stuff on the crimes bill. Have you heard all the things about the negativity of the arresting people and whatever? Because we react, the very thing that we're trying to teach people not to do, our government has often done, which is react instead of thinking things through. And the idea, to me, is you think through a longer-term solution. And I don't know if any of you saw 60 Minutes a couple weeks ago, but it was on their prison system. It was amazing. What they're doing in their prison system is everybody has a room that they decorate. They have keys to go in and out as they get privileges. If they've been in jail for a long time for a serious crime, and they are doing all the right things and behaving well in a very, a pretty, I don't know, independent situation in a way, a much more humane kind of situation than we do in prison here. Then what winds up happening is they get to go out on weekends with their families, and they're being trained so that when they get out of jail, they can get a job that has meaning for them.
Where's this at?
Germany. Yeah. But there's some people from Pennsylvania that went over to look at what they're doing. We did rehabilitation for a fairly short period of time in this country to really look at the long term. But if you look at little anecdotal things, I think about this grandmother who goes in to a prison, a very rough prison in the South, and she works with these young men on writing and developing skills, literacy skills. And they said to her, "Why are you doing this? You know there's like an 85% recidivism rate." She said, "Not my boys."
Yeah.
And they looked, and her boys did not have the kind of recidivism. They had like a 10% recidivism rate because they were cared about, right? They were cared about, and they were taught skills that would make a difference in their lives. And what we know, even on probation, is that the best measure of success is that people are connected to community and that they have a job that has meaning for them. And so I'm not sure why there aren't people going to, we have the ability to create that change. And we were talking about writing laws and changing legislation at lunch, that we actually do have the power to do that. I wrote legislation with a congressman that established a baseline criteria for anybody who works in the field of domestic violence with perpetrators. And it was a pain in the neck to do it and to build coalitions, but it was worth it because we protected the rights of grassroots people to do the work so that they didn't have to be licensed. And we ensured that people who were licensed had some basic training that they needed to have. So I think there are, and I think we just need to look at things differently. I think we need to look in a longer term way at how we actually help people and bring in the resources so that we're not just addressing one issue. And I don't think anger is just one issue. I think anger has to do with all of these issues. That there are things coming at people from the outside that they have every right to be angry at. People in this country are angry now. There's a lot of anger in this country. Yeah.
Yeah, I do a lot of work with probation and parole, and one of the things that we're doing with Prop 47 is it's coming to an end. And Mike Delarocha, the one who helped write the law and work with that, he says that one of the things that drives the anger is the fear. Is that as soon as people get fearful, and what's happening right now is the statistics are saying that crime is on the rise, and right away everybody's looking at Prop 47. But what they don't look at is that crime is on the rise across the country, and we've really dropped the ball as far as rehabilitation as what we're doing inside the prisons in the state of California.
We've privatized prisons.
Right.
If there's an incentive to make a profit, then people in prison don't get the same. I've done some work in CIW, and they used to train people. They could come out with a paralegal degree, they could come out, this sort of thing. The other thing, though, that is not looked at is crime is on the rise a little bit, but it's still lower than it was. And so crime rates are actually lower across the country. And our media, if you want to really do something, call the media when they do something you like. Call the networks, you can call them. I call them, I use different accents. Hello. This is petty. But I do that because if they get lots of calls, I mean, I don't have all kinds of time, but I spend some of it calling them to tell them if they're doing something that's coverage that's even decent. Because here's the thing, anger that just sits there is what we see with a lot of people. That's what we see with what's happening, I'm just going to say it, in the Trump campaign, with people's rage and people pushing each other, the racism. It's like, it's anger that has no place to go. If you take that anger and you do something with it, it's a whole different ballgame. You feel better. You do something with it. And it doesn't smolder or sit there and eat at your insides. So doing the stuff like time out is one thing. Then taking whatever you're angry about and trying to change it, that's a whole other thing. So just real quickly, because I'm looking at the time here, let me talk a little bit about prevention. Prevention is a really important part of any anger management. And I love HALT. Don't get too hungry, too angry, too lonely, too tired. I love that. But we also use an Aikido metaphor. Aikido is a martial art of reconciliation. And most martial arts are not about being violent. They're about being nonviolent, right? The philosophy of martial arts. In this country, they're about kicking somebody's rear end. But that's not really philosophically where they come from. So Aikido has three basic premises. The first one is don't put yourself in a dicey situation, right? So if you know that you're not in a good place, you're paying attention to yourself here, then you don't put yourself there. If you know you're going into something and you can't avoid it, start talking to yourself about how you're going to handle it. Start coming up with alternatives in your own head and choices for ways you can handle it. The second thing with Aikido is if you find yourself in a dicey situation, think your way out of it. And the third thing is that any form of aggression, verbal aggression, physical aggression, is a last resort. Now, if we could get people to think that way, most people would never even get to the last resort because they'd be successful in the first two. So we use Aikido, and I like to tell stories. And there's a wonderful story about a black belt from this country who goes to Japan and he rides on Shinkansen, the speed train. And he gets on the train. When he gets on the train, he sees a big man, kind of drunk. He doesn't smell very good. He's unkempt, and he's pushing people. And he's just pushed a woman. And this martial arts expert from this country gets ready to take him out. But right before he can, an elderly man goes up to this man and he says, "What's in your lunchbox?" And sort of throws the guy off and goes, "Persimmons and soup." And the elderly man said, "Oh, I grow persimmons. What kind of persimmons do you have?" And the guy's still like, and so he tells it, right? And then he says, "What kind of soup do you have?" And the man tells him, and he said, "You must have a wife who loves you a lot to spend the time to make that soup." And the man starts to cry. And he says, "I had a wife who loved me until 2 weeks ago, and my wife died." And the martial arts expert said, "I learned the true meaning of Aikido, which is getting to the heart." And that when he left the train, this very drunk, disheveled man was lying in the lap of this elderly man who was just patting his back. And so I think when we look at range and anger, it's hard to get through anger. And certain types of anger, I don't know how to get through. I can tell you that right now. There have been guys in groups sometimes where I'm not sure what to do. And I don't want to give up on them too soon because you can get surprised like crazy. But it's hard. And it's hard at home. You're not always on your best game. But remember, even to get an A, you can screw up to 10% of the time. So we have a little cushion in there. Now the last thing I want to talk about, because Pat told me that this was on the questions that I wrote, which of course I forgot what I wrote. She's asking me these questions, I'm going, "Wow, those are good questions." She said, "Well, you wrote them." I tried to make them really easy. But it's the power of choice. The power of choice. If you, as you were saying in the back, that anger is about fear. Anger is a secondary emotion, right? If we look at an iceberg, anger's on the top, but under anger is fear, rejection, hurt, all kinds of powerlessness. And for most people in arguments, what winds up happening if they're really angry is that they feel powerless. They don't know what to do. And if you're looking at people who grow up, by the way, this is true, a lot of substance abusers, it's true, a lot of people who are domestically abusive, they have grown up in families where there's exposure, right? That's the most common risk marker, at least in domestic violence, for perpetrators of domestic violence, is that they've grown up exposed to domestic violence. So when they react, they're reacting historically, right? They're not just reacting, they're reacting to that, all the things we learn as kids that we don't remember, that we have no cognitive ability to describe, but we are left with the feeling. The feelings that come back to us when we're in an argument with somebody we love. So, what we started looking at was choices, because people oftentimes feel like they don't have choices. Let me ask you, how many of you guys get really pissed off on the freeway during rush hour? Right? It's a California thing. Right? A lot of people get really angry and they don't feel like they have a choice. I know I used to feel like people were hired to irritate me. Because they either cut you off, they don't let you in, they tailgate you, right? And then I drove on the Autobahn. Have any of you driven on the Autobahn? Yeah. totally cool. Yeah, you can drive as fast as you want, and it's in kilometers. So you think it says 110 kilometers, and you go, I'm like, you're in the Grand Prix. But it's only 66 miles, so miles an hour. But I watch people there, and they don't tailgate you like they do in California. Like California, they give you the courtesy at 20 feet or something. They're literally on your tail. But if you live in California, you know how to handle this. You just slam on your bike. Let them run. And then you sue them for their chalet. I'm watching people, and nobody's doing that. Nobody's doing this. They're not flipping anybody off. They're just moving over and driving on. And I thought, wow. And I found out later there's a big fine attached to not moving over. But it doesn't mean that you still wouldn't get angry about it. But people weren't. The meaning to them, the meaning to us, and the meaning to them is different. We think it's an assault on our humanity. One of the techniques I used with guys in group was to say, when somebody cuts you off on the freeway, just say to yourself, oh my God, I wonder if their water broke. And because we don't know why somebody's driving crazy. Right? We don't know if they just found out they had cancer, if they just found out their partner got rushed to the hospital. We don't know. We're making assumptions. So the meaning to us is different than the meaning over there. And I think we can adjust the meaning. So I thought, oh, this is totally cool. I'm going to go back to California and drive like this. So I did. I came back. My first day, I got to practice. Somebody just cut me right off. I had slam on my brake. I fishtailed. And I looked at him and I thought, if I say something like yell or make a face or something, he's going to yell and we're going to go up. What do I actually want to happen? Which is what I want to think like, and I want people I work with to think. What do I want to have happen, and what's the best way to get there? So I thought, oh, I'll just do it. So I just went like this. And he looked at me and he said, I think he said, thank you, thank you. He said something with a U on it. And I thought, well, this is lovely. And I thought, you don't have to change the whole picture. You just need to adjust the frame, right? You just need to perceive it a little differently. And so I started thinking about, what do I do when I go into driving on the freeway? And I know it's going to be a pain. What are the things that you do to make it a better drive? What do you do?
I like to wave at people who are being
You wave at people repeatedly.
I'll wave! They just get so mad.
Tell them to number one.
Tell them number one. You're on the freeway, right? You know you're going to go into that. What else do you do?
Music?
I turn that, I think South County is stupid county. I say it every day. I love what you just shared, because as soon as I come here, it's a stupid county. Every day there's an accident. I turn my radio up as loud as that car can go, and I mean loud. I block everything else. I don't care if it cuts me off, because I'm like, whatever.
Okay, so you're perfect. Yeah.
I did an experiment one time, and I drove in the far right lane
Every day.
every day from Costa Mesa down here from the far right lane. Nobody cuts you off.
Yeah.
Nobody tries to get in front of you. I actually drove with less emotion in that far right lane than I ever do on any of the other.
So you planned a strategy that made your life easier. Okay.
No, but nobody bothered her because she was in the slow lane. Everybody else was flying.
Yeah, I was going the same. I got there the same time. It wasn't like I was a half an hour late, getting later.
See, I get in the slow lane and then it ends and it becomes, and then I have to drive over another lane, and today I almost didn't make it. But think about the things you do. It's listening to radio, talking to your friends, maybe whatever it is that begins. Now I have a book. I don't know if any of you have ever seen it. It's called Auto Aerobics. Have any of you ever seen this? This is not a sex book. It's auto aerobics. Okay, so this book tells you how to make your car a floating gymnasium. So try this on your way home. Grab your steering wheel and press. Hold. I could do this for a long time. Release. Do this about 10 or 15 times, and you're totally buff by the time you get home. Your chin's not flopping around as much, your arms a little firmer, my hanging gardens are a little tighter, and your chest is kind of perky. If you have a cruise control, you can do thigh master, guys, like this. For those of you in the back, I should stand up on the chair, but you get my drift here. You can do leg lifts. You can dance. I like to dance in the car, you know, do my little thing. I do Michael Jackson, grab my crotch sometimes. In the car that is going to make it, make it a joyful ride home. And then, I've never said that before. I think you guys are getting me really excited right now. And then the third thing is, if you have a sunroof, you can reach out the top and you wave. The people think you're waving at them. You're doing stretches, and so you make friends with people on the freeway. So it's about building choice in. It's about having choices that you can. It's the same thing you do with substance abuse. What are the choices people have instead of drinking? What do they have? So, I'm about done. Does anybody have any questions?
Oh, I was gonna share something that I did. I try and let people in, depending on if I'm angry. So I did this one time, and the guy, I don't know why, he leaned out of his car like he was giving me a hug. And I thought that, I've never seen that, and I just thought that was
What did, he had no hands on the wheel?
Yeah.
He'd be drinking too, so.
But because I let him in,
Yeah.
he leaned out like he was giving me a hug.
That's nice. That's nice.
He's in one of your classes.
The guy in my class would have slammed on his brake and stopped you and come back to your car. Anybody else have any comments? Thank you guys a lot for your.